can get with that. You can get with this or you can get with that.
From iconic Gen Z kid shows and movies like Drake and Josh and High School Musical, to nostalgic trends of the early 2000s like Silly Bandz, the OG iPod Touch, and Build-A-Bear Workshop, to even the more obscure deep cuts like Zoopals plates, Mighty Beanz, and Nickelodeon's defunct Hotel and Waterpark. Ladies and gentlemen, today we'll be going over the ultimate Gen Z Nostalgia Iceberg. This video serves as an unofficial sequel to my Gen Z Internet Nostalgia video, so if you end up liking this one, be sure to check that one out after. Link will be down below and at the end of the video. I made sure not to cover the same stuff over again to keep both videos fresh and interesting. Now enough yapping, let's get straight into Tier 1. Wii and Wii Sports. No console defined childhood gaming quite like the Nintendo Wii. Whether you were bowling strikes in Wii Sports or flailing wildly in WarioWare, this was the family gaming experience of the early 2000s. The Wii Remote, with its simple motion controls, made gaming feel interactive in a way that no other console had done before. Wii Sports was so iconic that even your grandparents probably played it. The Mii customization screen was also legendary, leading to some of the most cursed avatars imaginable. And let's be real, everyone had at least one Wii Remote-shaped dent in their wall from an accidental throw during Wii bowling. The Wii also had a library full of gems like Mario Kart Wii and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, making it a staple of childhood gaming sleepovers. OG YouTube. Before YouTube became the over-commercialized influencer hub it is today, me included I guess, it was a lawless land of chaotic skits, terrible webcam quality, and absolute gold-tier cringe. Fred screaming at the top of his lungs, Smosh lip-syncing to the Pokemon theme song, and Annoying Orange tormenting innocent fruit. This was the content pipeline we thrived on. Nigahiga's How to Be Ninja was a must-watch tutorial for every middle schooler who thought they were edgy. Ray William Johnson's =3 was basically the internet's first attempt at meme commentary before reaction content took over. And yeah, those early Shane Dawson skits were a thing. This was all YouTube before the algorithms, when that whole random equals funny was the peak of comedy, and every video had at least one unnecessary explosion sound effect. It was an era where anyone could go viral with just a camcorder and some questionable editing skills. OG iPod Touch. Owning an iPod Touch instantly gave you clout on the school bus. This thing was basically an iPhone, but without the ability to actually call anyone. Because why would a kid need that when they had Tap Tap Revenge and Doodle Jump? The iconic tap to unlock screen, the satisfying scrolling music player interface, and the absolute grind of collecting gift cards just to buy a single 99-cent app were all part of this legendary experience. Jailbreaking your iPod to get free apps was also a rite of passage, even if it meant potentially bricking the thing. And let's not forget the built-in YouTube app, yes, back when it had the old school TV icon. The iPod Touch was peak tech flex in the 2000s, and the amount of cracked screens on those things could probably fill a landfill. Flappy Bird. Flappy Bird was one of the biggest cases of accidental mobile game success ever. Released in 2013, it was a simple but rage-inducing game that had players tapping their screens in pure frustration to keep the tiny bird airborne. The physics were somehow both janky and addicting, which led to players breaking their phones out of anger. Literally. The game became so viral that it was making the creator a reported $50,000 a day in ad revenue. Overwhelmed by the attention and the backlash from people losing their sanity over it, the creator pulled the game from the App Store, turning any device with Flappy Bird installed into it a collector's item. People were selling their phones on eBay with the game pre-installed for thousands, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had collectively lost its mind. The gameplay was infuriatingly simple, yet somehow impossible to master, cementing its legacy as one of the most frustrating mobile games ever. OG Nickelodeon. Before Nickelodeon turned into whatever it is today, it was the go-to channel for Gen Z kids. iCarly basically predicted YouTuber influencer culture before it was even a thing, with Carly, Sam, and Freddie running a successful internet show out of their loft. Victorious gave us insane meme-worthy moments, and let's not forget peak-era SpongeBob, which gave us some of the most quotable and memeable moments in TV history. This was the golden age of Nickelodeon. where every show had personality and it wasn't just a reboot of something that already existed. If you didn't stay up past your bedtime watching Nick at Night and pretending to be asleep when your parents walked in, did you even have a childhood? Nickelodeon in this era had some of the most bizarre yet legendary crossovers, like iCarly meeting One Direction, or Jimmy Neutron and the Fairly Odd Parents colliding in an animated fever dream. Fruitager era aesthetic. You might not know the name, but you definitely remember the look. Fruitager era was the defining aesthetic of the mid to late 2000s tech and branding. Glossy 3D buttons, ultra-saturated colors, and an obsession with bubbles, water droplets, and futuristic swooshes. Think Windows Vista wallpapers, iPod Nano commercials, and early social media sites that looked like they were designed inside a lava lamp. It was an era of shiny web design before minimalism took over and made everything soulless. If you ever owned a flip phone with a gradient-heavy UI or downloaded a widget that lets you check the weather in an absurdly detailed 3D sphere, congrats. You were living in peak Fruitager era. It was a time when everything looked futuristic in the most aggressively 2000s way possible. Looking back, it was both incredibly nostalgic and strangely overwhelming. OG Disney Channel. Back when Disney Channel had actual original programming instead of endless sequels and spin-offs, shows like That's So Raven, Lizzie McGuire, and Hannah Montana dominated the after-school lineup. That's So Raven gave us an iconic lead who could literally see the future, but somehow always still managed to misinterpret every single vision. Lizzie McGuire was every millennial and Gen Z kid's first awkward middle school experience. And of course, Hannah Montana made every kid think they could secretly be living a double life as a pop star. This was peak Disney Channel, and it's never been the same since. The original sitcom energy, cheesy one-liners, and iconic theme songs were unmatched. The Disney Channel original movies from that era also hit different, some of which we'll be covering a little bit later down in the iceberg. Game Boy Advance. If you didn't have a Game Boy Advance, were you even a 2000s kid? This handheld console was a lifeline for road trips, long waits at the doctor's office, and those times when you pretended to be asleep but were actually grinding through Pokemon, or in my case, that weird Power Rangers game that I kind of even forgot the name of. The chunky OG model was great, but the Game Boy Advance SP was where it was at, with the backlight and flip screen that made it feel like the coolest gadget ever. Cartridges were small enough to lose constantly, and if you didn't blow on them aggressively when they stopped working, you must have never really owned a Game Boy. From Pokemon Fire Red to Mario Kart Super Circuit, the Game Boy Advance was peak handheld gaming nostalgia. OG Cartoon Network. Cartoon Network in the early 2010s was on another level. Shows like Adventure Time and Regular Show weren't just kids' cartoons. They were weird, slightly existential masterpieces that appealed to both kids and teenagers. Adventure Time was colorful, whimsical, and low-key depressing if you actually thought about the lore. Regular Show was iconic and literal nonsense. Just two slackers getting to the most absurdly over-the-top situations imaginable. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We got Chowder, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Every show had flavor. This was an era where Cartoon Network took risks instead of rebooting old franchises for nostalgia bait, and it paid off. The humor was wild, the animation styles were all unique, and somehow that network just got what kids wanted to watch. Moving on to Tier 2. OG YouTube Rewind. Before YouTube Rewind became an overproduced mess that no one wanted, the 2013 and 2014 versions were peak internet culture. These were the days when YouTube actually understood its community, featuring its best creators in fun, chaotic montages that captured the best and the cringiest moments of the year. From What Does the Fox Say to PewDiePie running through a Minecraft world, these rewinds felt like an inside joke that every YouTube user was in on. It was a time before corporate sponsorships took over, and the skits were actually funny instead of painfully forced. The 2013 Rewind had the iconic Harlem Shake segment, and the 2014 Rewind was packed with references to viral challenges and meme-worthy moments. These videos perfectly encapsulated the energy of early 2010s YouTube before the downfall began. Looking back, these rewinds now feel like time capsules of an internet era we'll never get back. OG mobile games. There was a time when these mobile games owned every school hallway, bus ride, and family gathering. Temple Run was the OG endless runner, making every kid believe they could swipe fast enough to outrun those creepy demon monkeys. Doodle Jump had one of the simplest but most addicting mechanics. Just tilt your phone and pray you didn't hit a bad platform. Subway Surfers, of course, is still relevant today and turned public transport into the most high-stakes parkour experience imaginable. And don't forget Jetpack Joyride, which made side-scrolling action feel insanely fun. Each of these games had the perfect mix of mindless fun and brutal difficulty that kept players coming back for just one more run. These games weren't just popular, they were a cultural moment, defining an era before mobile gaming became overrun with microtransactions. Moshi Monsters. While Club Penguin and Webkinz took the spotlight, Moshi Monsters was the underground gem of browser pet games. Players adopted adorable creatures like Katsumas and Poppets, decorated their homes, and solved puzzles to earn rocks, the in-game currency. The game had a weirdly detailed world with lore, minigames, and even an in-game magazine that felt like a major event every time the new issue dropped. Moshi Monsters even had its own music career with songs like Moshi Dance that somehow became bangers. Unfortunately, like many beloved online games, it eventually shut down, breaking the hearts of countless players. But for those who remember logging in just to feed their pet and explore the Moshi world, it remains an unforgettable piece of Gen Z nostalgia. The creepypasta boom. Before horror TikTok and Reddit's no sleep, creepypasta was the way to scare yourself silly online. This was the era when Slenderman was lurking in the woods, Marble Hornets had people convinced it was real found footage, and Jeff the Killer's terrifying grin haunted every forum. Stories like Ben Drowned freaked me the fuck out and made people second guess playing old cartridges. And the Russian sleep experiment spread like wildfire as one of the most unsettling internet horror stories ever. These creepypastas felt real because they were just plausible enough to mess with your head, especially if you read them late at night. The rise of YouTube narrators reading these terrifying tales only cemented them further into Gen Z's collective nightmares. These stories not only shaped internet horror culture, but also inspired countless indie horror games and movies. Looking back, it's wild how deeply these eerie internet stories embedded themselves into Gen Z's subconscious. High School Musical craze. If you were alive in the mid-2000s, High School Musical was inescapable, whether you liked it or not. The first movie dropped in 2006, and suddenly every kid was screaming "Breaking Free" like they were auditioning for Broadway. Zac Efron and Vanessa Hudgens became the ultimate teen idols, despite the fact that Efron didn't even sing his own parts in the first movie. The sequel's release in 2007 was treated like a world event, with Disney Channel hyping it up everywhere. Then High School Musical 3 somehow ended up in actual theaters, cementing the franchise as extremely popular. The over-the-top choreography, aggressively corny drama, and bizarrely intense basketball metaphors ensured the series would live rent-free in everyone's head forever. Love it or hate it, High School Musical is forever embedded in Gen Z's pop culture DNA. Rush Hour movie franchise. Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker had a chemistry so legendary that Rush Hour became one of the most iconic action comedy franchises of the 2000s. The first movie came out in 1998, but the sequels in 2001 and 2007 made sure the series was a staple for Gen Z kids growing up. The perfect mix of insane stunts, hilarious one-liners, and buddy cop energy made these films endlessly rewatchable. The martial arts sequences were jaw-dropping, and the comedy was top tier, creating a franchise that stood the test of time. Even years later, people still revisit Rush Hour for its action-packed nostalgia. The franchise's blend of comedy and action is something modern movies rarely pull off so effortlessly. Toys R Us. Before Amazon took over everything, Toys R Us was magic for kids. Walking into one felt like stepping into paradise. Aisles filled with action figures, stuffed animals, video games, and literal walls of Nerf guns. The Christmas catalog was the event of the year, with kids circling the toys they desperately wanted Santa to bring. The store's jingle was burned into every child's brain, but as online shopping grew, Toys R Us couldn't keep up, eventually shutting down its US stores in 2018. It was the end of an era, and while attempts to revive the brand have been made, it's never been the same. For Gen Z, Toys R Us remains a bittersweet memory of a childhood shopping spree fantasyland, forever frozen in time. Windows XP and the pinball game. The Windows XP startup sound alone is enough to send waves of nostalgia through any Gen Z kid's brain. This was the peak operating system for school computer labs and home desktops everywhere, with that signature blue and green interface that just felt comforting. But let's be real, the best part of Windows XP was the Space Cadet pinball game. This game was the ultimate time waster with its neon colors, satisfying sound effects, and frantic gameplay. If you're supposed to be doing homework but just ended up playing pinball for hours instead, believe me, you were not alone. Even though Windows XP eventually faded away, its aesthetics and that iconic pinball game live on in nostalgia-fueled memories. Moving on to Tier 3. Disney Channel Flash Games. Back when browser games weren't blocked on every school computer, Disney Channel's Flash games were the time killer of choice. Lilo and Stitch Sandwich Stacker had you catching sandwich ingredients like your life depended on it, because apparently making an overstuffed sandwich was the height of entertainment. The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody games were basically platformers where you dodged Mr. Mosby's wrath. And then there were the Kim Possible games, which made every kid believe they had elite spy reflexes. The graphics were terrible, the controls were clunky, but none of that mattered because the games were addicting. They were chaotic, simple, and free. 3 things that kids absolutely love. Disney Channel Flash games were a golden era of internet gaming, now lost forever thanks to the death of Flash. Straight to DVD Disney Channel movies. Ah yes, the straight to DVD Disney Channel movies. The forgotten stepchildren of the Disney Empire. These were the movies that never got primetime Disney Channel treatment, but still ended up in every family's DVD collection. The game plan starring The Rock was peak tough guy learns to love his child cinema, and Eddie's $1 Million Cook-Off was proof that the height of comedy in the 2000s was a dude likes to cook. Minutemen gave us time travel in a questionable amount of silver puffer jackets, while Hatching Pete was about a guy in a chicken costume, I think. The plots didn't always make sense, but that didn't stop them from being weirdly enjoyable. These movies were cheesy, predictable, and filled with low-budget charm, and honestly, that's what made them great. No one talks about them, but deep down, we all remember watching them at least once. Silly Bandz. What were you doing if you didn't trade Silly Bandz in elementary school? These little rubber band bracelets came in every shape imaginable, from animals to musical instruments to, for some reason, Justin Bieber. The playground economy revolved around Silly Bandz, with kids making trades that felt as high stakes as Wall Street deals. Teachers hated them, which only made them cooler. Getting your Silly Bandz confiscated was practically a badge of honor. Of course, we all ignored the fact that wearing too many at once cut off circulation to our hands, but whatever. Fashion hurts, I guess. Eventually, the craze died out as quickly as it started, leaving kids with drawers full of now useless rubber bands. But for a brief, glorious moment, Silly Bandz ruled the world. The hamster Kia commercials. There was a time when Kia's marketing team decided the best way to sell a car was to have CGI hamsters dancing to pop music. Yeah. And somehow, it worked. The Kia Soul commercials featuring breakdancing hamsters became weirdly iconic, to the point where people actually started associating the car with them. Whether it was Party Rock Anthem or some other overhyped radio hit, these hamsters were always vibing harder than anyone had the right to. The commercials were so popular that Kia kept making them for years, even when the novelty had clearly worn off. Looking back, it's kind of insane that an ad campaign about rodents selling cars became a cultural moment. But here we are, still talking about it like it was the Super Bowl halftime show of commercials. PlayStation 3 and free online play. Before Sony realized they could charge people to play online, The PS3 was the last bastion of free multiplayer gaming. Xbox 360 players had to cough up money for Xbox Live, but PS3 users got to flex their free online play like some sort of consolation prize for not getting the right console they wanted for Christmas. The console had its flaws, but at least you didn't have to pay for a subscription just to get wiped in Modern Warfare 2. Let's also not forget the glorious mess that was PlayStation Home, a virtual world where people spent hours dressing up avatars and standing awkwardly in a fake mall. The PS3 may have been Sony's awkward misstep between the PS2 and PS4, but it had a solid library and, most importantly, free online gaming, a concept that now seems long gone. Old Disney stores. Walking into a Disney store was basically like stepping into a theme park without the actual rides. These stores were a big deal. Shiny floors, giant stuffed animals, and that one TV in the back playing non-stop Disney movie trailers. If you were a kid, you begged your parents to let you go inside, only to immediately make eye contact with a $50 plush you had to have. The employees were basically unofficial Disney cast members, always way too excited to fold shirts with Mickey Mouse on them. Every mall had one, and every kid had at least one meltdown over not getting something from it. Now, most of them are gone, leaving malls even sadder than they already are. It's yet another place of Gen Z nostalgia lost to time and corporate downsizing. Build-A-Bear Workshop. Every Gen Z kid had at least 3 Build-A-Bear Workshop creations. And if you didn't, you know damn well you wanted one. The experience was kinda intense. Picking out a lifeless bear, stuffing it with cotton, and then whispering your deepest secrets into a tiny plush heart before shoving it inside. The whole give it a bath station was completely unnecessary, but we all did it anyway. Then came the real challenge, choosing the outfit, which was always overpriced, but how could you say no to a bear in tiny Converse shoes? The checkout process always included some weird birth certificate ritual that made the bear feel like your actual child. And finally, you left the store holding a bear that cost way too much, but somehow felt priceless. Build-A-Bear was capitalism at its finest, and we fell for it every time. OG Just Dance. Before TikTok dance trends, Just Dance was the original way to embarrass yourself in front of friends and family. The Wii version was peak chaos. Motion controls that barely worked, a flimsy strap that no one used, and a TV screen that met its demise every time someone got too into Rasputin. The game's song selections were a perfect mix of absolute bangers and songs you never wanted to hear again after failing them for the 10th time. The choreography always looked simple until you attempted it, only to realize you moved more like an NPC than a professional dancer. Playing solo was a workout, playing with friends was a comedy show, and playing at family gatherings was a guaranteed way to see your uncle pull a muscle. Somehow, despite the madness, it became a party staple and a rite of passage for Wii owners everywhere. Love it or hate it, Just Dance ensured that at least once in your life, you've looked ridiculous trying to keep up with a virtual dancer. Moving on to Tier 4. Zoopals plates infomercials. If you watched kids' channels in the 2000s, you definitely saw Zoopals commercials at least 100 times. These were paper plates with cartoon animal faces that weren't just dinnerware. They were a lifestyle. The commercial's jingle was so catchy that it's probably still taking up valuable space in your brain. Every kid wanted these damn plates, even though they were just glorified disposable plates with ears. Somehow, putting ketchup in the bunny's ears made the food taste better. Don't ask why, it just did. Parents never wanted to buy them because they were just plates. But that didn't stop kids from begging. Zoopals were the height of fine dining for anyone under the age of 10. And honestly, we might still want them back. George Lopez jump scare. If you ever fell asleep watching Nickelodeon, you know the horror of waking up at 1 a.m. to the George Lopez theme song blasting at full volume. One minute you were peacefully dozing off to Drake and Josh, and the next you were being violently shaken awake by Lowrider and an aggressive, bright, bouncing cast montage. No warning, no transition, just straight up panic. The screen would glow so brightly it would wake up an entire household, and the sheer volume felt like a personal attack. Nobody ever planned to watch George Lopez, it kinda just happened to you. The show itself was solid, but let's be real. Its legacy for Gen Z was the PTSD-inducing jump scare it caused every kid at least once. To this day, hearing Lowrider at random still triggers heavy nostalgia and flashbacks. Club Penguin Secret Missions. While everyone remembers Club Penguin for the iconic dance parties and petty band-worthy insults, the PSA missions was where the real gamers thrived. These secret agent missions had you solving puzzles, tracking down villains, and proving you were more than just a casual. Herbert the Polar Bear was practically the final boss of childhood, and if you didn't take down his evil schemes, what were you even doing? The missions required actual brain power, which made finishing them feel like peak intellectual achievement. The fact that these were hidden away behind an application process made them feel even more elite. Club Penguin may be gone, but those PSA missions remain one of the greatest online gaming experiences of our childhoods. Nothing hit quite like cracking the code in the coffee shop while your puffle did absolutely nothing to help. The PSP. Before the Switch took over the handheld world, the PSP was the gaming flex of the 2000s. It was like a PS2 in your pocket, except the UMD discs were fragile, loud, obnoxious, and made no sense. God of War, Daxter, and Little Big Planet PSP proved handheld gaming could actually be good before mobile gaming ruined everything. The screen was beautiful, the graphics were insane for the time, and it felt dangerous carrying one around, like it should have come with a briefcase or something. The battery life was trash, the analog nub felt like a mistake, but none of that mattered when you were playing Midnight Club 3 in the backseat of a car. The PSP was ahead of its time, which is why Sony, naturally, decided to kill it off and pretend it never existed. We still haven't forgiven them. Toy to life fad. Once upon a time, kids convinced their parents to drop hundreds of dollars on plastic figures that unlocked in-game content. Skylanders started the madness, making kids feel like gods for placing figures on the portal and watching them appear in-game. Then Disney Infinity tried to capitalize on the trend, letting kids collect their favorite characters in overpriced figurine form. The games themselves were actually fun, but let's be honest, they were just elaborate money printers. The moment the trend died, every household was left with an unusable pile of figurines that cost more than a next-gen console. Looking back, we all should have seen the crash coming, but we were too blinded by the thrill of collecting. The Elf Yourself trend. Every Christmas season, the Elf Yourself website returned like a plague, allowing people to turn themselves into terrifying dancing elves. This was the peak of send this to your relatives internet culture, where your mom would make an entire family of creepy animated elves and email it to everyone she knew. The animations were nightmare fuel, but for some reason, we all thought it was pretty funny at the time. The worst part? The site is still online, meaning you can relive the trauma whenever you want. Did we love it? Did we hate it? Honestly, who really knows? But what's undeniable is that Elf Yourself was a Christmas tradition whether we liked it or not. There was truly no escape from the digital monstrosity. Dumb ways to die. If there was ever a mobile game that truly captured the unhinged energy of Gen Z, it was Dumb Ways to Die. Originally a PSA about train safety, yeah, really, the game turned morbidly adorable deaths into a series of minigames. The whole thing was just tiny bean-shaped creatures meeting horrific ends in the most adorable ways possible. It was oddly educational in the sense that it taught kids the dangers of, let's say, poking a grizzly bear with a stick. The song was ridiculously catchy, the deaths were hilarious, and the game itself was weirdly addicting. There was something truly special about a game where losing meant watching your character get electrocuted, eaten, or flattened like a pancake. The fact that this was originally about train safety just makes it even more chaotic and funny. Nickelodeon Hotel. Nickelodeon saw Disney's theme park empire and said, yeah, we could do that too. Except they couldn't. The Nickelodeon Hotel in Orlando was supposed to be a dream destination for kids, complete with themed rooms, character breakfasts, and daily slime dumps. In reality, it was chaotic. The hotel got worse reviews than a one-star Yelp restaurant, and the themed rooms were pretty bad, Believe me, I know, somehow me and my family went like 3 to 4 times. The slime-filled water park was the main attraction, but everything else felt like a fever dream. Eventually, the hotel shut down and was rebranded into a regular resort, erasing any trace of Nickelodeon's ambitious failure. Somehow though, if you went, you remember it as the coolest place ever, because nostalgia has just a beautiful way of lying to us. Moving on to Tier 5. Disney Channel crossover specials. There was no greater event on Disney Channel than the legendary crossover specials. Shows like That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana had kids losing their minds as characters from different shows somehow ended up in the same universe. It didn't matter if the logic made zero sense. Seeing Zack and Cody interact with Raven was peak TV. The hype for these specials was unreal, with promos playing for weeks in advance. And if you had a copy of That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana on DVD like I did, there was also that crazy trivia game, which is a super deep cut if any of you even know what I'm talking about. These events made Disney Channel feel like its own connected universe long before MCU made it a thing. The execution may have been chaotic and kinda dumb, but no one cared because our favorite characters were finally meeting. Honestly, Disney should bring these back just for the nostalgia factor alone. Mighty Beanz. For reasons no one can explain, kids in the early 2000s became obsessed with collecting tiny, plastic beans that could wobble upright. Mighty Beanz had different designs, personalities, and collectability rankings, which somehow turned them into must-have items. The way they rolled around unpredictably was both frustrating and addicting, like fidget spinners before fidget spinners existed. Kids would trade them at school like they were high-value stocks, despite the fact that they were, again, just plastic beans. Some of them were rare, which only fueled the obsession, because nothing mattered more than flexing a limited edition Mighty Bean. Eventually, like all good fads, they disappeared into the void of forgotten toys. These were lodged so deep in my subconscious that for a second I doubted if these really even existed. But nope, they really did, and for a brief moment, we were all fully invested in the economy of tiny beans. Pass the plate Disney shorts. Before Disney Channel decided that every second of screen time had to be packed with sitcom drama, they aired Pass the Plate, a series of educational shorts about food from around the world. Hosted by Brenda Song, the segments highlighted different international dishes and the cultural significance behind them. On paper, this sounds like an informative and wholesome concept. But let's be real, most kids only watched them because they had no choice. These shorts aired constantly between shows, making them impossible to avoid. You could be waiting for The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody to come back on, and suddenly you're learning about sushi prep. We didn't really appreciate it back then, but looking back, Pass the Plate was a pretty cool idea and kind of ahead of its time. It was basically early foodie content before the rise of cooking YouTube. DS PictoChat. If you had a Nintendo DS, you absolutely spent hours on PictoChat, even though there was never actually anything to do. The concept was simple: local chat rooms where you and your friends could send messages and terrible doodles to each other. It was essentially the first form of social media for kids who weren't allowed on MySpace yet. The best part? Sending the most ridiculous, inappropriate, or cursed drawings hoping no one snitched. PictoChat was also the tool for mysterious messages sent to random people at school, leading to some truly chaotic moments. Unfortunately, the feature only worked in close proximity, which meant most of us were just messaging our siblings from across the couch. But for a brief moment, it felt like we were hacking into the Matrix. Go-Gurt and Danimals Crush Cups commercials. There was an era where yogurt was everywhere, and Go-Gurt was the king of that movement. The commercials always featured kids doing absurd stunts, as if slurping yogurt from a tube somehow gave you the ability to backflip off a skateboard or something. Then there were Danimals Crush Cups, which introduced the totally unnecessary concept of squeezing yogurt into your mouth instead of using a spoon. But the most legendary ad campaign has to be the Zack and Cody Danimals Cruise giveaway. These ads are a super deep cut, and it made it seem like kids everywhere were winning, But did anyone actually meet Zach and Cody on a luxury cruise? It's been like over a decade now, and we still don't have confirmation. The mystery remains one of the great unsolved conspiracies of Gen Z childhood. The Disney Channel games. Before Disney Plus Originals took over, the Disney Channel games was a major event. This was essentially Disney's attempt at making their own version of the Olympics, except with the teen actors that starred in their shows instead of world-class athletes. Cast members from different Disney shows were split into teams that competed in ridiculous challenges, and somehow, it kinda worked. Watching your favorite Disney stars get way too competitive over obstacle courses was peak entertainment. The games had their own theme song, dramatic team reveals, and enough hype to make it feel like life or death. Of course, the challenges themselves were hilariously low budget, but nobody cared. To this day, it remains one of the most ambitious and unhinged ideas Disney Channel ever pulled off. Nickelodeon Worldwide Day of Play. Nickelodeon tried to be responsible once a year by shutting down for Worldwide Day of Play, encouraging kids to go outside instead of watching TV. The entire network went dark for a few hours, which felt like a personal attack if you had planned to watch SpongeBob. The worst part? There was nothing else to do because this was pre-smartphone era, so you actually had to go outside. Schools even got in on it, turning recess into some grand event like we didn't already have recess every day. Sure, playing outside is great and all, but forcing us into it all felt wrong. Of course, the irony was that as soon as Nickelodeon came back on, every kid ran straight back to the TV. Nice try, Nickelodeon, but we weren't falling for it. And that wraps up the iceberg. If you made it this far, you should definitely check out my Gen Z Internet Nostalgia video on screen now. Thank you all for watching. Peace.